Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something I know you're super curious about, the Texas Senate race.
Oh yeah, this one's a real nail-biter.
Right. It's Ted Cruz going up against Colin Allred, and so many people are asking, can Cruz actually lose?
It's a good question.
I mean, could Texas flip?
Could a state that's been such a solid Republican stronghold actually go blue?
Yeah. And this race is even more important because it could actually determine who controls the Senate.
Huge implications.
Exactly. So we got to break it all down. And we're using some articles from Newsweek. They were published just yesterday, October 29th, 2024.
Fresh off the press.
Totally. Now, we always hear Texas is reliably Republican, but I bet you're wondering, when was the last time a Democrat actually won a Senate seat there?
You'd have to go all the way back to 1988.
Wow, 1988.
That's a long time.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
Like how big of a deal it would be if Allred actually won.
It would be huge.
And here's the thing. Most of the forecasters and polls, they still say Cruz is favored to win, but some of these polls are showing a much closer race than anyone expected.
True 538 has Cruz with a 3.4-point lead.
And Decision Desk HQ,
They have him up by 3.1 points.
okay, so those might sound like comfortable margins, but we're talking about Texas.
Right. A state where Republicans usually win by landslides.
So these numbers, they're making everyone nervous.
They really are. In this context, that's practically a tie.
It makes you think something might be shifting in Texas politics, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, there's definitely something going on. And then you have this internal poll from GBAO Strategies. This one really shook things up.
Oh yeah, tell me about that one.
This poll actually shows Cruz and Allred tied at 46%.
Whoa.
That's a huge deal.
Absolutely. Can you walk us through what an internal poll is and why this one is causing such a stir?
Sure. So an internal poll is basically a poll that's done by a candidate's own campaign or party.
So it's like they're polling their own voters.
Kind of. It's more like they're trying to get a sense of how things are looking from their perspective.
I see. So it's not necessarily as objective as a poll from like a big polling firm.
Right. It can be a little biased,
Yeah.
but it can also be really helpful for campaigns because they can tailor the questions to specific groups of voters and get a more granular understanding of where they stand.
So it looks like a sneak peek behind the curtain.
Exactly. And in this case, Allred's campaign is using this poll very strategically. They're blasting it all over social media, trying to build momentum and excitement.
They're saying, look, this race is winnable.
Exactly. And it's not just this one poll either. The Activote and New York Times Siena College polls, they show Cruz with a bit more of a cushion, 5 and 4 points respectively. But even those leads are smaller than his margin of victory over Beto O'Rourke in 2018.
Wow. And that 2018 race was considered pretty close for Texas, right?
It was. So even the polls that show Cruz ahead are suggesting there's a shift happening.
It's like the ground is shaking under our feet.
Right. Remember, O'Rourke's campaign really energized Democrats in Texas and across the country. The fact that Cruz's lead isn't as large this time around could mean those voters are still fired up and ready to make Texas a little less red.
Okay, so this is getting interesting. And then there's the Emerson College Polling the Hill poll. This one showed Cruz up by just a single point.
1 point.
What makes this poll particularly fascinating is the trend it observed over time.
Yeah, so during the polling period, Cruz's support actually went down while Allred's went up.
Really?
Yep. Which suggests that Allred might be gaining momentum as we get closer to Election Day. Plus, his name recognition is growing, which is super important for a challenger trying to unseat an incumbent.
You can't vote for someone you've never heard of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got all these polls, each with its own quirks and nuances, some showing a super tight race, others giving Cruz a bit more breathing room. But the one thing they all seem to agree on is that this is way closer than anyone predicted, no doubt. And that's why it's getting so much national attention.
Right, because this isn't just about Texas. This race could have ripple effects across the entire country.
It could change the balance of power in the Senate, which would have a huge impact on, well, everything.
Okay, so we've got the polls, we've got the national implications, but what does it all mean for the average person? Like, why should someone in, say, California or Maine care about what's happening in Texas?
That's a great question, and we're going to tackle it head on right after a quick word from our sponsors. So stick with us. We'll be right back.
We're back and ready to dig into why this Texas Senate race matters to you, even if you don't live there. Because, let's face it, everyone loves a good political drama, right?
It's definitely got people glued to their screens, and the impact goes way beyond Texas. We're talking about a seat in the U.S. Senate, and this one race could decide which party controls the whole thing.
Okay, so for those who need a quick refresher, what does it actually mean if one party controls the Senate? Why should we care?
Well, the Senate has a ton of power. They get to confirm presidential appointments, like judges for the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
And they have a say in passing laws. The majority party gets to set the agenda. So if Democrats were to flip the Senate, it would have a massive impact on what current president's name can actually do.
So it's not just about bragging rights. It can actually change the direction of the country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if Allred were to win in Texas, it would send shockwaves through the political establishment.
It would be a sign that Democrats are making inroads in places that used to be solidly Republican.
Right. Like, hold on, is Texas actually becoming a swing state?
Exactly. And, Newsweek also mentioned Florida as another state that Democrats are targeting for both the Senate and the presidential election. I'm curious what you think. How might these races influence each other?
It's like a domino effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Democrats can flip Texas, it could give them momentum in other states that were once considered Republican strongholds.
That makes sense. They'd be riding a wave of success.
Exactly. Texas and Florida are both large, diverse states, and they've been trending more Democratic in recent years. If Democrats can win big in either one, it could really energize their base and make them feel like anything is possible.
It would also force Republicans to rethink their strategies.
Totally. They couldn't just assume they'll win in those states anymore. They'd have to start investing more resources and paying closer attention to the changing demographics and the voters.
So we've talked about the national implications, but let's zoom back in on Texas. What issues are really resonating with voters in this race? What are the candidates focusing on?
Well, Allred has been hammering on things like healthcare, education, the economy.
The bread and butter issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's trying to appeal to moderate voters and people who are maybe disillusioned with the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also playing up his background as a former NFL player and a civil rights attorney.
So he's presenting himself as a unifier?
Exactly. Somebody who can bring people together.
Yeah.
And he's trying to build a coalition that goes beyond traditional Democratic voters.
Like those suburban voters who are leaning towards the Democrats but haven't fully committed.
Right. Now, Cruz, on the other hand, he's sticking with his conservative base.
So what's he hitting on?
Issues like border security, gun rights, opposition to abortion.
The classic conservative talking points.
Right. He's also trying to link Allred to national Democrats like Democratic political figure and Democratic political figure, hoping to make him look too liberal for Texas.
It's a classic political strategy, trying to paint your opponent as too extreme.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you've got one candidate who's trying to expand the electorate and one who's trying to energize his base.
Two very different approaches.
And it's just too close to call.
Like a political thriller unfolding in real time.
It really is. And it shows that even in a state like Texas, things are changing. The political landscape is shifting. And this Senate race is the perfect example of that.
We've covered the polls, the national implications, the candidate strategies. Now for the final act of our deep dive, we're going to ask you, the listener, to put on your prognosticator hat. What do you think the future holds for Texas politics? Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We're back for the final stretch of our Texas deep dive. Phew, it's been a wild ride, hasn't it? From those nail-biting polls to talk of a potential political earthquake, this race has everything.
It really does. It shows just how dynamic and unpredictable politics can be.
Especially in a state like Texas, which is going through such a fascinating transformation right now.
Totally. So much is changing.
Okay, so let's end with a thought-provoking question for you, our listeners. We know you all love those aha moments, so here it is. If Allred were to actually pull off this upset and win, what would that tell us about the future of Texas as a Republican stronghold? Would this be the end of an era?
It would definitely be a huge turning point. Just imagine Texas, the state that gave us Lyndon B. Johnson and so many conservative icons, electing a Democrat to the Senate.
It would be like, whoa, what just happened? Exactly. It would send a really powerful message that Texas is no longer a guaranteed win for Republicans.
I can see the headlines now. Texas goes purple, the red state blues.
Right. And think about what it would mean for the 2024 presidential election. If Texas were to actually become a battleground state, it would completely change the electoral map.
Both parties would have to pour resources into Texas.
Yeah. And it could even tip the scales in favor of the Democratic candidate.
Wow. That's a major shift. Talk about a political paradigm shift.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to demographics. Texas is becoming increasingly diverse.
Especially the growing Latino population.
Right. They could be a decisive factor in future elections.
And let's not forget about the younger generation.
Oh, yeah. They're a force to be reckoned with.
They tend to be more progressive on issues like climate change and social justice.
Their votes could have a huge impact, not just in Texas, but across the whole country.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this final thought. This Texas Senate race, It's more than just a contest between two candidates. It's a reflection of the bigger political forces that are reshaping America.
And the outcome could have a huge impact on the future of Texas and the entire nation.
It's a reminder that politics is never static. Things are constantly changing, and we're living through a really dynamic period in American history.
We're seeing it play out right in front of us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Texas politics. We hope you learned a lot and are ready to impress your friends with your political insights. Keep your eyes on Texas, everyone, because things are about to get very interesting.